Proverbs chapter 5. This is a chapter that is going to speak to the topic of sexual immorality. And it's a warning specifically to a young man from a father about the dangers of sexual immorality and the deceptive allure that comes with that. And it also gets into what is the cost of succumbing to its temptations. And then, towards the end, talks about God's design, what God intended when it comes to romantic love. I'm just going to go ahead. At times, we've read through the entire passage and then gone back verse by verse. For the sake of time, I'm just going to go through this verse by verse. We'll read a section, and then we'll go through it. But we'll start here, and we'll try to get through the entire chapter in Proverbs 5 here. So it says this, it says, "My son, pay attention to my wisdom. Lend your ear to my understanding, that you may preserve discretion, and your lips may keep knowledge." So the first thing I want to point out here is this is a father speaking to his son. Wisdom from a father to his son, and this is how not just this chapter starts, but actually many chapters, especially in the early parts of Proverbs. I think it's the first 9 or 10 chapters of Proverbs are a lot of this kind of thing. My son, or sometimes my children. These are the words of a father to his son or his children. And as we go through here, the most direct instruction or implication is for a son, but of course, anytime we read scriptures, we can find and look for, and I think there's very direct application here to daughters as well, both to men and to women. But he says here, "My son, pay attention." He wants to arrest the attention of his son before he starts into this warning and wisdom. And what Solomon is about to tell his son is very important. Important enough that he's going to start off saying, "Listen to me. Listen up." And so this is what I'm going to say to all of you today. Pay close attention to what we're talking about today. You know, there is a tendency when it comes to the topic of sexual morality, which, by the way, is a huge topic in the Bible. Is that something that is, barely mentioned in the Bible? Or does it happen to be something that is brought up a lot, that there's constant stories about people getting into trouble with sexual morality and warnings about them, both in the Old Testament and New Testament? But I think there is a tendency among maybe some of us to think, well, that's not something that I really have to be concerned about. Maybe it's because you grew up in a Christian family. And you might think, well, that's not something that will really impact me. Or maybe you're just young and you haven't experienced the strength of the temptation that can come when it comes to sexual morality. Or maybe you're happily married and you think, oh, that will never be a temptation in my life. My wife, my husband, and I, we're doing really well, and that's something that I'll never really have to deal with in any kind of serious way. One of the things that Paul said to the Corinthians, this is in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 12, he said this as a warning: "Let him who thinks he stands take heed, listen, pay attention, lest he falls." So we need to take heed. We need to pay attention. This is in the Bible many, many times over for a reason. And there is a huge problem with sexual immorality in our culture. It surrounds us. And it's not just here in America, not just in Ohio. This is all over the world. It's not new. It's not something unique to this century, this generation. It's been around from the beginning of time. And it's one of the most pervasive and destructive sins that we find in all of the world. And why is that? Well, as the Bible also says, there is a way between a man and a maid, or a man and a young woman, that is very interesting. I've told my kids this, but men and women are like magnets. There is an attraction between men and women, and it's not like those cheap refrigerator magnets that you get from your realtor. The magnetism, the attraction between men and women is more like those, what do you call those? Those rare earth magnets. And you take them and you start to put them together, and then bam! They just suck, right together. And that is the way that God designed it to be between men and women. When young men and young women come to a certain age, there is a longing among young ladies to be embraced by a man. And there is a longing from young men to embrace a woman. And you know what? That attraction is good. It's God designed. He created it. And He created it for a reason, right? And He created it to be a strong attraction for a reason, right? Because what did God design in the very beginning when He created men and women? That men and women would fill the earth with children, right? And that requires men and women to come together in what the Bible calls marriage. If He had made that attraction weak, then, men and women might decide, it's not worth it. I mean, marriage is kind of tough, You got these guys, they always leave the toilet seat up, and these women are constantly clogging the drains, in the shower with all their hair. It's just like, lots of things that you have to deal with. And so, but God created this strong attraction between men and women because He wanted to see people come together, men and women to come together to form families, to fill the earth. But sexual morality is taking something good that God designed and using it outside of its intended purpose. And the original design that God had for men and women is that when it comes to romantic love, is that you have one woman and one man who come together for a lifetime. And that was His design. That is the boundaries that He put around sexuality. And much sin, right, is the same thing. Much sin is taking something good and using it or abusing it outside of the boundaries that God has set in place. And there is a need in our day, especially in the church, for there to be clarity around this topic. People tend to, I think, avoid or generalize. And why is that? I think it's because so many Christians have been swept up into sexual immorality because of our culture. And a lot of times you'll find churches today where it's not just, there is temptation, of course, and sometimes people succumb to temptation. But then there is just people who are not living the kind of life that they ought to be living. For different reasons. Maybe it's because they just don't know. And I've talked to people before who go to church. I remember talking to a guy years ago, and he was going to a church and seemed to love the Lord. And I found out he was living with his girlfriend. And I was, kind of taken aback. That's something that's not I'm not used to. But in just talking to him, I found out he had no idea that this was something that the Bible forbids. He had no idea. So I took the opportunity to tell him, and I thought, well, maybe he's just going to get mad at me. I had actually ended up emailing him a whole Bible study on the topic, and I didn't hear from him. I thought, well, I guess it's a lot easier when it's just an acquaintance, not somebody that you are really close to. But a year later, I actually saw him in person. And he told me, and he came up to me, he says, I never responded to you, but I want to thank you for sending that to me. After you sent that to me, I looked at what the Bible said, and I talked to my girlfriend, and I told her, you know what, we need to either move out or get married. And she told me, what? No, I'm not interested in that, and she left. And so, he was trying to do the right thing, and she wasn't interested. So the other reason I think sometimes just even Christians just don't care enough about sexual morality, and that's unfortunate. And then the other thing that I've found, and this is something I've kind of really realized more recently, is that I think for many Christians, and I don't know what the number is, but they believe that sin is just a normal part of life. And that, well, everybody sins, and so I'm just going to, do these things, and, well, I just can't help it because, I'm just only human. And that's certainly not the kind of attitude that we as Christians should have when it comes to this topic. And as we read here in Proverbs chapter 5, this is not the attitude of Solomon or the Lord when it comes to immorality, and specifically sexual immorality.